They laughed as they scraped the slowly stewed beef brisket into the trash. The one I'd spent hours preparing from a family recipe, just the way my husband, Arthur, used to love. No offense, Grandma. Jessica smirked. But we already ordered sushi. I stood there holding the empty serving platter, my hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from something colder. The laughter from the living room didn't stop. It never did anymore. They didn't notice when I stopped setting the table weeks ago, didn't care when I stopped joining them for dinner. I had become part of the furniture, silent, still, and easy to ignore. I carried the platter back into the kitchen, each step heavy. I didn't speak. Not then. Not yet. I washed the dish carefully, the way my mother taught me, with hot water and steady hands. The smell of slow-cooked meat still clung to the air like a memory. I opened the small window above the sink, letting in the cool evening breeze of mid-September. The garden outside was still mine. They hadn't claimed that. Not yet. Upstairs, someone slammed a door. One of the boys, maybe Ben or Alex, my grandsons, 18 and 16. Neither one had looked me in the eye in months, too busy with their phones, with their noise-canceling headphones, with becoming someone else entirely. I dried my hands on the old tea towel, my thoughts drifting to Arthur's favorite mug, the one with the small chip he refused to let me throw away, calling it character. He would have had words for tonight, but he was buried 7 years now, and I had only my silence to speak for me. The hallway was filled with their voices as I made my way back upstairs. I heard Jessica joke about my cooking again, something about 1,940 seconds cuisine. David, my son, didn't say a word. As always, just a chuckle, low and flat. Not quite laughter, more like consent. My room smelled of cedar and old books. The bed was made. It always was. It was the only place left that felt like mine. I sat on the edge and reached for the photo of Arthur, tucked into the frame of my mirror. His smile still looked like comfort, like truth. "You wouldn't have let this happen," I whispered. "You'd have said something." But he wasn't here, and I was tired of talking to pictures. I stood up, went to the drawer beside the bed, and pulled out the envelope. Thick, sealed, and untouched since February. The deed, the one they had never asked about, the one I never offered. Tomorrow morning, before they're even awake, I'll go. They think they can treat me like a ghost. They've forgotten who this house really belongs to. I didn't sleep that night, not from nerves those had long since burned out, but from something deeper. A stillness I hadn't felt in years, the kind that comes before a storm or after a final decision. I sat by the window, watching the porch light flicker and die. It had been doing that for weeks. David kept saying he'd fix it. He never did. At dawn, I dressed slowly. Gray slacks, a crisp blouse, the cardigan Arthur liked on me. I ran a comb through my thinning hair, twisted it into a bun, and pinned it in place with the same care I used when I was 20. Today, I would not look invisible. The house was still quiet. No footsteps overhead, no clatter in the kitchen. I moved soundlessly through the hallway, my bag already packed with everything I needed. Documents, IDs, the key ring they didn't know I still kept. I paused at the entrance to the dining room. The table was strewn with sushi containers, greasy bags, and half-empty cups. My platter was nowhere in sight. Maybe they'd tossed it, too. I almost hoped they had. Let them be thorough in their disrespect. I left a note on the refrigerator. Short, polite, out for the day. Don't wait up. That would be the last time I signed anything in this house. The air outside smelled like earth and coming rain. My knees ached as I walked down the steps, but I didn't waver. My old sedan was waiting at the curb, dented and dependable. I drove slowly past the bakery that used to know my order, past the school where David had scraped his knee in 3rd grade. Nothing had changed in the neighborhood, only the people. The lawyer's office sat in a brick building above a shuttered pharmacy. I'd made the appointment 2 weeks after Arthur's funeral, but never gone through with it. Then the boys lost their 2nd job, and Jessica wanted to redecorate the living room, and David said, "Just until we get on our feet." And so I moved in. That was 3 years ago. The secretary greeted me. "He's ready for you, Eleanor." Mr. Albright looked older than I remembered. Or maybe it was just that I finally saw him clearly. "It's good to see you again," he said. "You brought the deed." I handed him the envelope without a word. He unfolded the papers, eyes scanning quickly. "Still in your name," he confirmed, fully. "Your husband never added anyone else." "They don't know that," I said. He looked up, eyebrows raised. "They assume the house belongs to David now because they live there, because I let them." I folded my hands. "But assumptions aren't ownership." "Mr. Albright nodded slowly. "And you're ready to reclaim legal control." "I'm ready," I said. "I want to draft a notice, effective immediately. They have 60 days to vacate the premises. I want it official. I want it to come from you." He hesitated, then leaned back. "You're sure about this?" I looked at him, steady. They laughed as they threw my food in the trash. That was enough. He began typing. Afterward, I walked 2 blocks to the bank. I canceled the supplementary credit card David had insisted on for convenience, the one his family used so freely. I opened a new account, solely in my name. I rewrote the beneficiary of my life insurance. I left nothing to chance. By noon, the sky had darkened. I stood outside the notary's office with the papers in hand, signed, stamped, legally binding. They wouldn't see it coming. And that, perhaps, was the saddest part of all, because for years I had let them believe they were entitled. They forgot I still had teeth, and I had just started bearing them. The first time I carried my suitcase into David's house, they all smiled at me. I remember that clearly now. Their warmth, their words, the way Jessica touched my arm and said, "You'll always have a place here." I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. My husband had been gone a year, and the walls of my own home were too quiet, too heavy. So, when David said, "Mom, come stay with us. It'll be easier," I packed what I thought I'd need and locked the door behind me. Jessica had even prepared the guest room. Fresh sheets, lavender candles, a knitted throw at the foot of the bed. "You'll be comfortable," she promised. The boys carried my boxes upstairs, joking loudly, trying to make it seem like a celebration. David opened a bottle of wine that night, and we sat around the table laughing, telling stories about Arthur. I thought maybe grief had given me back my family, but comfort has a way of souring. The guest room was never quite mine. The lavender candles disappeared after a week. The knitted throw ended up in the living room. Slowly, my space shrank. First, it was just my things moved around without asking. Then it was Jessica knocking once before entering. Sometimes not at all. "We're all family here," she'd say, as if that excused the intrusion. Meals changed too. At first, I cooked often, the way Arthur liked. Roasts, stews, fresh bread. Everyone praised my food. Then Jessica began sighing. "It's too heavy, too old-fashioned." Soon, I was told to rest while she cooked. Her food was all sauces from jars, noodles, and takeout. But David nodded and ate, grateful not to argue. The boys stopped sitting with me after dinner. They'd vanish upstairs with their plates, laughter echoing down the hallway. Once I followed, thinking maybe they wanted me near. I found the door shut in my face. headphones sealing them off from the world. My life became the quiet corners. Mornings at the window with tea, afternoons folding laundry that wasn't mine, evenings listening to their muffled voices through the walls. No one was cruel. Not at first. It was smaller things, little exclusions that piled like stones. When I mentioned visiting my old church, David said, "It's too far, Mom. You don't need the drive." When I bought a new cardigan, Jessica muttered, "Waste of money." When I asked about going to Ben's game, Alex laughed. "Grandma, you wouldn't get it." They thought I didn't notice. That old age dulled more than sight and hearing. But I noticed everything. One night washing dishes, I caught my reflection in the darkened kitchen window. My face looked back at me, smaller, somehow faded. That was when I realized I hadn't just moved in with my son. I'd handed them my life, piece by piece, and they'd taken it without question. And yet, I told myself then, they mean well. They're just busy. Things will get better. It would take years and one cruel laugh over my ruined dinner before I finally understood. They never wanted me. They only wanted what I brought with me. The first time Jessica asked me not to cook, she did it with a smile. "You've done enough, Eleanor," she said, taking the pot of stew out of my hands. "Relax. Be our guest." It sounded kind, and for a moment, I almost felt cared for. But I noticed the way she wrinkled her nose at the smell of onions and garlic, the way she glanced at David as if seeking his agreement. He gave it without hesitation. "Yeah, Mom, sit down. You don't need to work yourself." I did as they asked. I sat, my hands folding and unfolding in my lap, while Jessica heated up frozen lasagna and called it dinner. The boys cheered. Ben, because it meant no vegetables. Alex, because he loved the thick layers of cheese. No one asked me if I wanted a portion. No one even noticed when I ate only a slice of bread. It started small. That was the point. At first, it was meals. Then it was laundry. "Don't worry about it, Eleanor. I'll take care of it," Jessica said once, pulling the basket from my hands. But she didn't take care of it. Not really. She let it pile up until she had a free moment, and then scolded me gently for letting it sit. "You should have reminded me." Then came the living room. I used to sit there in the evenings, reading quietly while they watched television. One day, I came back from the kitchen to find my chair pushed into the corner, a pile of laundry baskets where I usually Saturday. "Oh, sorry, Mom," David said when he saw me hesitate. "It's just temporary." But the baskets never moved. My chair stayed in the corner. Little by little, my presence became an inconvenience. My steps too slow, my voice too soft, my habits too old. "Don't leave your knitting here, Grandma," Alex said one afternoon, kicking my basket under the couch. "It looks messy," Ben laughed. "Yeah, it's like we live in a retirement home." They thought it was funny. I smiled faintly, because smiling was easier than crying. The worst part wasn't their words. It was David's silence. My son, who once held my hand crossing every street, who used to call me Mommy even when he was too old for it, never defended me. When Jessica sighed about my fragrant stews, he chuckled. When the boys mimicked the way I cleared my throat, he only shook his head and smiled. He wasn't cruel. He was worse. He was absent. I tried to reclaim little pieces of myself. I baked cookies one Sunday morning, filling the kitchen with cinnamon and butter just the way Arthur liked them. When the family came downstairs, Ben lifted one to his mouth, sniffed, and tossed it back onto the plate. "Too hard," he said. Jessica added, "Store-bought would have been fine, Eleanor." And they laughed. I told myself it didn't matter, that I still had my room. But even there, the walls began to press in. Jessica started storing boxes in my closet. David asked if they could move the treadmill into my corner. Alex sometimes sprawled across my bed, shoes on the quilt Arthur's mother had made while playing games on his phone. When I asked him to stop, he said, "Chill, Grandma. It's just a bed." One night, I found a pile of my clothes on the floor. My cardigans, my blouses, folded neatly once, now shoved aside to make room for Jessica's off-season coats. I stood there holding a wool sweater Arthur once loved on me, and I realized I didn't own anything here anymore. Not space, not silence, not dignity. I stopped asking for small things. Rides to the store, help with groceries, a quiet afternoon. Every request was met with sighs, with rolled eyes, with, "Not now, Eleanor." So I swallowed the words. I became what they wanted, invisible. But invisibility has its price. When they forgot my birthday, I didn't remind them. When they left for vacation without asking if I wanted to come, I only waved from the porch. When Jessica complained to her friend on the phone about having an old person underfoot, I didn't confront her. I just sat by the window knitting a scarf no one would wear and let the words sink into me like stones. And still, I told myself they meant well, that families stumble, that grief had made us all harsher, more tired. I told myself David loved me, even if he didn't show it. I told myself Ben and Alex would remember one day that I once held them when they cried, but the truth was simpler. They had stopped seeing me as a person. I was a shadow, a relic, a burden they carried without gratitude. It took me too long to understand that sometimes silence doesn't protect you. Sometimes it only teaches people how much they can take. By the time they threw my dinner in the trash, it wasn't the first insult. It was only the last one I would ever accept. When the house was quiet, when the voices upstairs were muffled behind doors, and I heard nothing but the ticking of the hallway clock, I often spoke to Arthur, not out loud. My throat was too tired for that. But in the small whispers of my heart, he'd been gone 7 years, yet I still reached for his side of the bed some nights, still expected to hear the rasp of his morning cough before the kettle boiled. He would have known what to say. He always did. When David was a boy and came home crying because the older kids teased him, Arthur sat him down and said, "Son, people only laugh at you if you let them." When I burned the first Thanksgiving turkey, he kissed my sooty cheek and said, "Doesn't matter, Ellie. You're the feast." He had a way of making dignity feel natural, not something you had to defend. But without him, I had grown smaller. Not physically, though my body did shrink with age, but in spirit. Each slight, each careless word pressed me down, made me quieter until my silence became a habit and then a prison. At night, I would sit with the old photo album, the one Jessica kept threatening to digitize. She said it like a kindness, but I knew what she meant. Out of sight, out of mind. Those pages held everything. David's first day of school with Arthur crouching beside him, tying his shoes. My own mother, apron stained with flour, holding a cherry pie like it was a crown. The small house Arthur and I bought with savings from his factory job and my sewing. That house was my kingdom once. I can still see the old dogwood tree Arthur planted by the porch, the one he put in the ground when David was born. Every nail hammered into its walls had been ours. Every bill paid by sweat and sacrifice. When Arthur died, everyone assumed I'd sell it. "Too much upkeep for you alone," David had said, but I didn't. Not right away. I kept it, dusted it, talked to the walls like they were listening until the loneliness became louder than the silence. And David's offer, "Move in, Mom, we'll take care of you," sounded like salvation. I remember the day I handed him the keys. He didn't look surprised, just relieved. You won't regret this, he said. But regret was already budding inside me, because I knew what he didn't. The deed was still in my name. The house never left me. I had tucked the papers away in an envelope hidden deep in a drawer. Insurance, I thought then. A lifeline if I ever needed one. Now, sitting in the room Jessica called the guest room, I realized Arthur's voice was the only one I trusted anymore. Don't let them take what's yours, Ellie, he would have said. Not the house, not your pride. I touched the quilt his mother had sewn, still stretched across my bed, though the corners sagged. Each stitch was a prayer, each square a memory of steadier hands. I thought of how Jessica's coats now crowded my closet, how Ben's sneakers sometimes landed on this very quilt, and how none of them seemed to notice the insult. It was in those moments I understood something sharp. Love without respect is only dependency. They didn't love me. They needed me, or rather, what I carried. My pension, my patience, my silence. But silence has an end. I folded the quilt carefully, smoothing the creases as though preparing it for travel. My fingers brushed over Arthur's face in the framed photo on the nightstand. I've been patient long enough, I murmured in the kind of voice that carries more weight than shouting. For years, I had begged quietly for scraps of kindness, a thank you, a hug, a seat at the table, and when those things never came, I convinced myself they might tomorrow. But Arthur's eyes in that photograph told me the truth I had been avoiding. Tomorrow never comes for those who don't claim it. That night, I did not pray for patience. I prayed for strength. Strength to remind them who I am. Strength to stop being their afterthought. Strength to carry Arthur's lesson one last time. People only laugh at you if you let them. I had let them long enough. The papers in the envelope weren't just documents anymore. They were my voice, sharpened after years of being ignored. They were my way of standing tall, even if my back bent with age. And when I closed my eyes that night, I could almost hear Arthur chuckle, low and sure, as if he were sitting beside me. That's my Ellie, he said in my mind. And for the first time in years, I believed him. It happened on a Tuesday evening, though the day itself hardly mattered. I was standing at the sink, rinsing the teacup I'd used all afternoon when Jessica's voice floated in from the hallway. Sharp, hushed, meant for David, but carried just enough that I could hear. I swear she makes the whole place smell like mothballs. Even the boys noticed. There was a pause, then a sigh I knew too well. David's sigh resigned, unwilling to contradict his wife. She's old, Jess. What do you expect? The words weren't cruel. That was what made them worse. Cruelty, at least, shows fire. But indifference? That's ice. I kept my hands under the running water a few seconds longer than I should have, scalding hot. The pain kept me steady. I dried the cup, set it on the rack, and walked to my room without a sound. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quilt, folded neatly at the foot. My mind was blank at first, then filled with 1,000 small humiliations. Jessica wrinkling her nose when I opened a jar of pickles. Ben waving air dramatically after I wore my rose perfume. Alex muttering to his friend, "Don't come over. It smells like Grandma's house here." Each time I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd lived too long to care about such small things. But hearing it tonight, plain and unvarnished, confirmed what I had known all along. I wasn't a guest in this house. I was an intrusion. Later, when I came down for a glass of water, Jessica was in the kitchen rearranging the pantry. My tea tins had been pushed to the back behind boxes of instant noodles and bags of chips. "Oh, Eleanor," she said without looking at me. "I moved some things around. Easier for us if the everyday stuff is in front. I nodded. What was there to say? I slid the kettle closer to the stove, but she reached past me and shifted it back. Let's keep the counters clear, all right? Her smile was polite, practiced, the kind you give to a stranger you don't plan to see again. That night, lying awake, I thought of Arthur again. He used to love the way our house smelled. Onions frying, laundry soap on the line, the faint scent of cedar from the chests. Smells like home, he'd say, leaning back in his chair. And here I was now, being told that my very existence smelled wrong. I didn't cry, not anymore. The tears had dried out of me years ago. Instead, I reached for the drawer of my nightstand, pulled out the envelope with the deed, and held it in my hands. The paper was cool, thick, reassuring. They thought I was powerless. They thought age had dulled me, made me forgetful, made me weak. But weakness isn't forgetting who you are. Weakness is letting others convince you that you don't matter. I mattered. This paper proved it. As the house settled into silence around me, I placed the envelope back in the drawer, smoothed the quilt, and lay down. Tomorrow, I thought, tomorrow I will take another step. They laughed at the idea of me. They dismissed me as a smell, a shadow. But shadows, when they rise, can block out the Sunday. The grocery store had always been my territory. I knew its aisles like old friends, where the best apples were stacked, where the butcher cut meat just the way Arthur liked, where flour was cheapest if you reached for the bottom shelf. For years, shopping was my way of caring. Feeding my family was never just about food. It was about presence, about saying without words, I am here for you. So when Jessica handed me the list that Saturday morning, I didn't argue. I slipped on my sweater, buttoned to the throat against the early chill, and walked the half-mile to the store. The boys had the car. David was busy, and Jessica didn't bother to offer me a ride. She simply said, "We're out of milk, and get the multigrain bread this time, not the plain white." I filled the cart slowly, choosing carefully, as I always did. Fresh carrots with the green top still on, a cut of beef with marbling that promised tenderness, the exact tea bags David preferred when he was a boy. My back ached by the time I reached the checkout, but I didn't mind. Providing felt like purpose, even if no one thanked me anymore. When I returned, arms heavy with bags, I found them in the kitchen. Jessica leaned against the counter, scrolling her phone. Ben and Alex were perched on stools, eating potato chips straight from the bag. They looked up briefly when I came in. "Oh, good," Jessica said, barely glancing. "Did you get the bread I asked for?" "Yes," I answered, setting it on the counter. She picked it up, frowned, and shook her head. "This is the wrong brand," I said, "the seeded multigrain, Eleanor. This one's too soft. The boys don't like it." Ben snorted. "Yeah, Grandma, this is like school cafeteria bread." I looked at the loaf, the one I'd chosen because it reminded me of the kind Arthur used to butter thick on Sunday mornings. Words gathered in my throat, then dissolved. I said nothing. Jessica sighed, tossing it aside. "I'll pick up the right one later. Next time, just call me if you're not sure. Next time." As though the hours I spent leaning on that cart, the ache in my knees, the thought I put into every item, none of it counted. I unpacked the rest of the groceries in silence. No one offered to help. The boys went back to their chips, Jessica to her phone. That evening, as I boiled potatoes and browned the beef for stew, Ben wandered in. He lifted the lid, wrinkled his nose. "It smells old." "Old?" I repeated. "Like, Grandma food." He laughed, shouted for Alex, who came running to sniff. Both of them doubled over with amusement. Jessica appeared in the doorway, her arms folded. "Boys," "That's enough." But she was smiling too, trying to hide it. David wasn't home yet, but I knew what he'd do. Shake his head, chuckle softly, say nothing. Always nothing. I stirred the stew, the spoon heavy in my hand. For a moment, I imagined slamming it down, imagined raising my voice until they all froze. But instead, I ladled broth into a bowl, tasted it carefully, and said, "It needs more salt." Later, when we sat at the table, Jessica slid the serving dish aside and placed a stack of takeout containers in the center. "Sushi and rolls tonight," she announced brightly, "just in case." They dug in, laughing, trading bites, while my stew cooled untouched. I ate alone, spooning it into a small bowl and carrying it upstairs. In my room, I set the bowl on the nightstand beside Arthur's picture. The broth had gone tepid, the potatoes sinking to the bottom. Still, I lifted the spoon and ate slowly, quietly. Each bite tasted of surrender, but not forever. As I swallowed, I thought of the envelope in my drawer, the paper waiting patiently like a loaded weapon. They didn't know. They didn't even imagine. One day soon, I told myself, I would not bring groceries through this door. I would not be measured by the softness of bread or the scent of stew. One day soon, they would discover what it felt like to come home and find the locks no longer fit their keys. And when that day came, I would sit right here, in this same chair, eating a meal I cooked for myself, seasoned not with salt, but with freedom. The first time they forgot to call me down for dinner, I thought it was an accident. I heard their voices, the scrape of chairs, the clatter of chopsticks against plates, but no one came to my door. I waited a few minutes, then longer. Finally, I walked quietly down the stairs, telling myself perhaps they were distracted. Perhaps David assumed Jessica had told me. Families forget. It happens. But when I reached the dining room, the truth was plain. They were all there. David at the head of the table, Jessica beside him, Ben and Alex already halfway through their plates. Boxes of takeout littered the table. Steam rose from cartons of noodles, soy sauce glistening. No place had been set for me. "Grandma," Ben said around a mouthful. "We didn't think you'd want this. Raw fish and all." Jessica dabbed her lips with a napkin. "We were going to save you a portion, Eleanor. There's soup in the fridge. Soup in the fridge. Not at the table. Not with them." David kept his eyes on his plate, chewing slowly. He didn't look up, didn't say a word. I turned, went to the kitchen, and pulled out the soup. One of those cans with a ring-pull lid, the kind I never would have bought for myself. I warmed it on the stove while their laughter drifted in from the dining room. When it was hot enough, I carried the bowl back upstairs. The sounds of their meal followed me. Chopsticks tapping, soda cans hissing open, the boys shouting over some joke I wasn't meant to hear. In my room, I sat on the bed with the soup cooling in my lap. Thin broth, overcooked noodles, not a hint of care in it. I thought of the dinners I used to make. Roasts slow-cooked until the meat fell apart. Bread risen and baked golden. Pies cooling on the windowsill. Those meals brought people together. These cartons only filled their stomachs. I ate in silence, each spoonful heavy with the weight of being forgotten. It didn't stop there. The next week, they did it again. This time, I went down early, hoping to be part of things. But Jessica was already setting the table for 4. "Oh, Eleanor," she said quickly. "I wasn't sure if you'd be hungry." We ordered Chinese again. Her smile was thin, apologetic, but she didn't add a 5th plate. She didn't ask me to sit. I went back upstairs. By the 3rd time, I understood. This was no accident. It was easier for them without me. One less plate, one less chair, one less voice. They didn't say it out loud, but they didn't need to. Every unopened invitation, every closed door, every takeout box without my name on it spoke clearly enough. That night, I carried a plate of crackers and cheese to my room and ate by the window, looking out at the street lights flickering to life. Mrs. Jensen across the road was sitting with her daughter and grandchildren on the porch, laughing, passing a bowl back and forth. I watched until the sky went dark, my plate empty in my lap. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was used to eating alone, that food fills the body whether it's shared or not. But deep inside, I knew what had been taken from me, not the meal, the belonging. When I washed my dish and set it back in the cupboard, I glanced toward the drawer where the envelope waited. There was no anger in me, not yet. Only the quiet certainty that my place in this house had been erased long before they stopped setting a plate. But the house still knew my name. The papers proved it. And one day soon, so would they. I tried once more to speak to David. It was late, the house already dim, the boys upstairs with their headphones clamped over their ears, Jessica tapping on her phone in the living room. I found him in the garage, bent over a stack of bills at the workbench. The light above buzzed faintly, casting shadows on his face. For a moment, he looked so much like Arthur, same furrow between the brows when numbers didn't add up, that I almost softened. "David," I began, my voice low but steady. "We need to talk." He glanced up, startled, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" No, everything was not okay. But I nodded anyway. Old habits. Then I tried again. "I feel like I don't belong here anymore. Meals, conversations, even birthdays." My voice faltered. "I don't know what I've done to make you keep me at a distance." He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, it's not like that. You're overthinking." "Am I?" I asked. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from restraint. "You sit at the table with your family, and I eat soup upstairs. You let Jessica dismiss me with a smile. You let the boys mock me, and you never, ever step in." David sighed, long and weary, as though I were the one burdening him. "It's just complicated. Jessica's under stress. The boys are teenagers. You know how they are. I'm caught in the middle. I don't want more conflict." "Conflict." The word scraped my throat. Since when is asking to be treated like a person a conflict? He shifted uncomfortably. "You have to understand, Mom. Things are different now. You live with us, but it's our household. Jessica has her way of doing things, and I need to support her. That's marriage." "And what about me?" My voice cracked, but I forced it back down. "Am I no one to you?" Finally, he looked at me. His eyes, so much like Arthur's, yet empty in a way Arthur's never were, met mine. "You're my mother. Of course you are. But maybe." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Maybe you should ease back. Let us run things. Don't take it so personally. Ease back." The words landed like stones, as though I had been pushing too hard simply by existing, by preparing a meal, by wanting a chair at the table. I straightened my shoulders. "I gave up my home for you, David. I trusted you." He winced, as if the reminder pained him. "Mom, you did the right thing. That house was too much for you. This is better, isn't it? Better. Alone, in a room that smelled of cedar and old books while laughter rose from downstairs." I didn't argue. What was the point? He had made his choice. Peace with Jessica over dignity for me. So I left him there, surrounded by his bills, his silence, his sighs. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing louder in my ears than it should have. In my room, I closed the door carefully, sat on the edge of the bed, and breathed. I had tried. I had asked for nothing but recognition, and even that was too much. The next morning, Jessica avoided my eyes. David left early. The boys brushed past me without a word. Life went on as though our conversation had been erased overnight, but it had not been erased for me. It was carved into me. That evening, when I made myself tea, I opened the drawer and touched the envelope again. The paper inside was cool, solid, mine. I pressed it to my chest, listening to the steady beat of my heart. David thought I had nothing left, that I was cornered, dependent, grateful for scraps. He thought wrong. If I was invisible to them, then I could move unseen, quietly, deliberately. They would not hear me shout, nor see me beg. They would only feel the floor shift beneath their feet when it was too late to stop it. That night I slept soundly for the first time in months because I knew with a clarity sharper than grief, sharper than hunger, sharper than age, I was done asking. From now on, I would be the one giving answers. I woke before dawn, as I often did, the house still wrapped in silence. I moved slowly, letting the floorboards creak under my feet just enough to remind myself this place was still mine. The kitchen was dim, the clock above the stove ticking steadily, the sound of a house pretending it belonged to someone else. That morning, I decided to try one last gesture. Not for them, not really, but for myself, a reminder that I still had something to give, even if they no longer wanted it. I pulled out the family recipe Arthur had loved best. Slowly stewed beef brisket. It wasn't written down anywhere. I carried it in my bones. I peeled the potatoes the way my mother taught me, thin enough not to waste, thick enough to hold their shape. The smell of herbs and slow-cooking meat filled the air, warm and sharp. A memory of Sunday dinners when laughter had been real, when David used to try to sneak a piece before I swatted his hand. By mid-afternoon, the house smelled like home, my kind of home, not theirs. I set the table myself, laid out the good plates Jessica kept tucked away for special occasions. I ironed a tablecloth from the back of the closet, the one with faint wine stains that told stories of old Christmases. For the first time in years, the dining room looked ready for family. When they came in, the boys from school, Jessica from errands, David from work, they stopped short in the doorway. "What's all this?" David asked, his voice uncertain. "Dinner?" I said simply, wiping my hands on a towel. "A proper one. Sit down." Ben sniffed the air. "Smells heavy." Jessica smiled tightly. "Eleanor, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady. "Now sit while it's hot." Reluctantly, they did. I carved the brisket, passing slices with potatoes and carrots, pouring gravy that shimmered in the light. For a moment, just a moment, it felt almost right. David tasted a bite, chewed slowly, then gave me a small nod. "It's good, Mom." But Jessica only picked at her plate, and the boys pushed food around with their forks. The silence stretched thin, every clink of cutlery sharp against it. Finally, Ben broke it. "Do we have to eat this? We already ordered sushi." Jessica laughed softly, trying to smooth it over. "The boys aren't used to this kind of meal, Eleanor. It's different for them." I watched as Alex slid his plate away, muttering, "Nobody eats like this anymore." And then, the sound I had dreaded, the scrape of chairs, the shuffle of plates lifted, carried not to the sink, but to the trash. Ben dropped the first piece of brisket into the bin with a careless flick. Alex followed, giggling. Jessica sighed almost theatrically as if to say, "You see how hard it is for me too." The rich smell of my cooking lingered in the air as my food hit the garbage, the dinner I had poured my heart into, reduced to scraps among coffee grounds and wrappers. I stood there, dish towel in my hand, watching. Not a word left my lips. David caught my eye then. For a second I thought he might stop them, but he only rubbed his temples, weary, and said nothing. Always nothing. Laughter rose from the boys as they pulled cartons of sushi from the bag Jessica had set on the counter. She joined them, chopsticks clicking, her voice light and cheerful. I washed my hands in the sink, the water running hot, steady, almost scalding. My reflection in the window stared back at me, pale but unbroken. That night, upstairs in my room, I sat on the bed with Arthur's photograph in my hands. "You wouldn't have let this happen," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew he didn't need to, because he had left me the strength to do it myself. I opened the drawer, pulled out the envelope, and laid it on the quilt. The paper inside held no warmth, but it held something stronger, authority. They thought they had thrown away my dinner. They didn't know they had just thrown away their home. And soon enough, I would remind them whose name was written in ink on those walls. I didn't storm out of the house that night. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. No, silence was sharper. They were laughing downstairs, the scrape of takeout cartons and soda fizzing while I folded the envelope into my handbag with steady hands. I had already decided. The next morning, I left before sunrise. The street was quiet, mist clinging low over the lawns. My shoes tapped the pavement, my knees aching, but I didn't slow. The lawyer's office opened at 8. I was there at 7:30, sitting on the bench outside, the deed pressed against my palm like a heartbeat. "Mr." Albright looked surprised to see me so early. "Eleanor," he said, ushering me inside. "Have you thought more about what we discussed?" "I don't need to think," I told him. My voice didn't shake. "I need papers drawn up. A formal eviction notice. 60 days. No loopholes." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll draft it today." "Not today," I corrected. "Now." He must have heard something in my tone because he didn't argue. The printer whirred, his pen scratched, and an hour later the notice lay before me. Legal language, neat and cold. "Vacate the premises. Failure to comply will result in legal action." I signed with a hand that hadn't felt that firm in years. From there, I went to the bank. The young clerk smiled politely until I explained what I wanted. "I'd like to cancel the supplementary credit card on my account, effective immediately." She blinked. "The one for David? Are you certain, Eleanor?" "Yes." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Do it quickly. Don't call my house. Don't send a letter. Send the confirmation here to the branch. I'll collect it myself." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Within minutes, David's family's easy access to my money was finished. I left the bank with my chest lifted higher than it had been in years. Each step home felt lighter, though I knew what awaited me. They would dismiss me again tonight. They would brush me aside. They would call me old, out of touch. Let them, because folded in my bag was the end of their certainty. When I reached the house, Jessica was in the kitchen, fussing over coffee. She looked up briefly. "Out for a walk?" "Yes," I said, setting my bag on the counter. "A walk." She didn't ask further. She never did. Upstairs in my room, I laid the envelope beside Arthur's photograph. This time, I didn't whisper to him. I didn't need to. His eyes in that picture seemed to know. It wasn't anger that filled me. Not anymore. It was clarity, sharp as glass. They thought I was a guest, a burden, a shadow at the edge of their table, but the truth was written in ink and sealed by law. This house was mine. And soon, very soon, they would learn what it felt like to be unwanted in the home they thought was theirs. The papers were ready by Friday. Mr. Albright slid the folder across his desk with a kind of solemnity, as if he understood more than he said. The eviction notice sat on top, crisp, official, carrying the weight of every silence I'd swallowed in that house. 60 days. Clear, final, undeniable. You don't have to serve it yourself, he said gently. I can send a courier. I shook my head. No, they'll hear it from me, my voice, not a stranger's. So I carried the folder home, tucked against my chest like a shield. The sun was low by the time I reached the street, the sky bruised with evening. Their cars were in the driveway. Jessica's SUV, David's dented sedan, Ben's beat-up hatchback. The house looked warm from the outside. Lights glowing, curtains drawn, the sound of television laughter spilling faintly into the yard. To anyone passing by, it might have looked like a family. Inside, the smell of soy sauce and ginger hung in the air. Takeout containers littered the counter, soda cans half empty. Ben and Alex sprawled in the living room, controllers in hand, eyes glued to the screen. Jessica sat with her phone, scrolling, while David leaned back, pretending at relaxation, but looking worn. None of them noticed me at first. I stood there, papers in hand, a ghost in plain sight. Finally, Jessica looked up. Oh, Eleanor, you're back. We ordered sushi. Didn't think you'd want any. Ben smirked. Yeah, Grandma's probably upstairs with her soup. Their laughter echoed. Familiar, expected. I didn't respond. I walked into the center of the room and set the folder on the coffee table right between the soda cans and the controllers. My hands didn't tremble. What's this? David asked, frowning as he reached for it. Read it, I said. He opened the folder, scanned the first page. His face drained of color. Mom, what is this supposed to mean? Jessica leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. An eviction notice? You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious. My voice was quiet, but the words carried. This is my house, my deed, my name on every brick and nail. I let you live here. I let you pretend it was yours. That ends now. The boys paused their game, staring. Ben laughed nervously. Is this a joke? No. I looked at him evenly. It's the opposite of a joke. It's the truth. David pushed the papers back at me, his hands shaking. Mom, you can't do this. We're your family. I am well aware, I said. And for years, I believed that meant I owed you everything. I gave you food, money, my time, my silence. You repaid me with mockery, with exclusion, with indifference. You've made me invisible in my own home, but invisible doesn't mean powerless. Jessica's voice sharpened. This is ridiculous. Where would we even go? Do you want your grandsons out on the street? They are not children anymore, I replied. They're young men who laugh as they throw my dinner into the trash. Let them laugh while they pack their things. David's eyes flicked up, desperate now. Mom, please, think about this. 60 days? That's not enough time. 60 days is more than enough, I cut in. Because I have already spent years waiting for even an ounce of respect. That time is over. Silence filled the room. The television buzzed faintly, ignored. The boys shifted uneasily, glancing between their parents and me. For the first time, I saw something in their faces. Not guilt, not yet. Shock, as though the ground beneath them had cracked open. I picked up the folder, slid it back under my arm. You'll each receive a copy tomorrow. signed and filed. I suggest you begin planning. Then I turned and walked toward the stairs. My steps were slow but steady. No one stopped me. No one dared. Up in my room, I closed the door and set the papers beside Arthur's photo. His smile looked different tonight. Approving. Proud. Downstairs, voices rose sharp, frantic, overlapping. I didn't listen. I poured myself tea, let the steam curl into the air, and sat quietly with the weight of decision settling into me. For the first time in years, the house was mine again. Not because they were gone yet, but because I had spoken, finally, in a voice they could not ignore. 60 days. 2 months. Enough time for them to learn what it means when the person you thought powerless decides she will no longer bow her head. They didn't speak to me the next morning. Not a word. The boys left early, slamming the door as if to remind me I was unwelcome. Jessica clattered around the kitchen louder than necessary, her silence a performance, each cabinet door shut with a little more force than the last. David lingered by the coffee pot, staring into his mug, then left without so much as a glance in my direction. I ate breakfast alone at the table. My breakfast, not theirs. Toast from bread I had chosen, butter spread carefully, tea brewed just the way Arthur liked it. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt rightful. By afternoon, David knocked on my door. His face was pale, drawn, the lines deeper than usual. "Mom," he began softly. "We need to talk." I closed the book I had been reading and looked up. "Yes." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "About last night, you blindsided us." "Did I?" I asked. My voice was calm. "Or did you blindside me when you let your family treat me like a nuisance? When you laughed as they mocked me? When you let them eat while I sat upstairs alone?" His shoulders slumped. "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple," I said. "Respect is never complicated." He rubbed his face, exhaled hard. "Jessica's furious. She says this isn't fair, that you're punishing her and the boys. They deserve, I interrupted sharply, to face the consequences of cruelty. They threw my food in the trash, David. Food I made with care. And you laughed with them. Tell me, what did I deserve in that moment?" He had no answer. His silence was louder than words. I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "This house was built by me and your father. Every brick, every bill, every year of sacrifice, it came from us. You live here because I allowed it. And you forgot that. You let them all forget that." For a moment, I thought I saw shame flicker in his eyes, but it passed too quickly. He shook his head. "So what now? You really want us gone in 60 days? Your own son? Your grandsons?" I felt my chest tighten, but I did not bend. "Yes, because my own son forgot what it means to be family. You think being my child gives you a right to take and take without giving back. You are wrong." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked suddenly small, like the boy I once held on his first day of school, terrified of the world. But the boy was gone. This was a man who had chosen silence over loyalty, comfort over courage. When he left, the door shut softly. Not a slam, not yet. That evening, I heard their voices downstairs, low, urgent, angry. Jessica's sharper than usual, Ben's raised in protest, Alex's muttered complaints. David said little, as always. I sat upstairs with my tea, listening not to the words, but to the sound of their panic. It was strange. For years, I had been the one silenced, the one excluded from their meals, their laughter, their plans. And now, with one signed paper, the roles had shifted. They whispered about me, argued about me, planned around me. I was no longer invisible. Later, when the house grew still, I stood by the window and looked out at the street. The old dogwood tree Arthur had planted years ago still stood near the fence, its branches reaching for the sky, stubborn and strong. The sight of it steadied me. This was my home, my garden, my life, and I had reclaimed it. They would pack boxes. They would argue and bargain and blame, but the walls would remain, and they would remember. Respect is never given freely. It is claimed, held, defended, and in 60 days' time, I would sit at this window alone again, but unbowed, and know that I had done what Arthur would have wanted. I had stood tall. For once, it was their turn to feel small. The days that followed were a storm of whispers and slammed doors. I did not need to eavesdrop to hear the panic running through the house. Jessica's voice carried sharpest, slicing through walls and ceilings. How can she do this after everything we've done for her? Everything. As if letting me sit upstairs with a bowl of canned soup was a gift. As if silence and mockery were kindness. Ben and Alex stomped about the house with the graceless anger of youth, muttering about unfairness, about crazy old ladies. I heard Alex one evening on the phone with a friend. "Yeah, we're getting kicked out of our own house. My grandma's nuts." He said it like a joke, but his voice cracked at the edges. David moved quieter than all of them. His steps on the stairs were slow, his sighs longer, his words few. He avoided my eyes when we crossed in the hall, as though shame weighed heavier than anger. For that, I almost pitied him. Almost. On the 4th day, Jessica cornered me in the kitchen. She blocked the doorway, arms crossed, face tight, with a fury that no smile could disguise. "Eleanor, this has gone far enough," she snapped. "You can't just toss us out. We have nowhere to go. The boys need stability." I spread jam on my toast. Calm, deliberate. "They'll find it elsewhere." She let out a bitter laugh. "You're punishing them because you feel what? Left out? Unappreciated? That's life. Families are messy. You don't get to bulldoze us because you didn't like a few dinners." I set down the knife, looked her squarely in the eye. "You call it a few dinners. I call it years of being treated as furniture, a nuisance, a smell, a shadow in my own home. This house is mine, Jessica. You were a guest." "You forgot that." Her mouth opened, closed. For once, she had no ready retort. She spun on her heel, muttering about lawyers, about rights. But I knew better. "Mr. Albright had assured me. Airtight papers, every line signed, stamped, filed. Their arguments were smoke against stone. That evening, David finally knocked. He stood in the doorway of my room, shoulders slumped, hands buried in his pockets like a boy about to confess to some schoolyard sin. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been looking at rentals. It's not easy. Everything's expensive." I nodded. "It usually is." He hesitated, then whispered, "Is there really no other way?" I studied his face. My son, my blood, the boy who once clutched my hand crossing streets, the man who had let me be erased in his own home. My heart softened, but only for a beat. Then it hardened again, the way steel cools after fire. "No, David, there isn't." He looked down at his shoes, nodded slowly, and left without another word. That night, the house felt different, quieter, though no less tense. They were retreating, pulling in on themselves, boxes appearing one by one in corners of rooms. Jessica's shoes stacked by the door, Ben's posters rolled and rubber-banded, Alex's books piled clumsily. I moved through it all like a shadow, the reverse of the ghost they had made me. This time I was not invisible. I was the gravity pulling them out, forcing them to face a life without the roof they had mocked me under. When I lay down to sleep, I looked again at Arthur's photograph. His eyes seemed to hold mine longer than usual, steady, approving. "Almost done," I whispered. "Almost." For the first time in years, my dreams were untroubled, no laughter at my expense, no slammed doors, just the image of the old dogwood tree in bloom and the knowledge that soon the house would be mine in more than name. Soon the air would carry only the scent of cedar, old books, and freedom. The 60th day arrived without ceremony. No sudden storm, no shouting match, no apology offered too late. The house was stripped bare in places now. Walls pale where posters had once hung, closets emptied of Jessica's coats, counters cleared of clutter. Their voices were thinner, too, brittle with exhaustion. I watched them move box by box through rooms that had once been filled with laughter I wasn't invited to join. Ben carried out his sneakers and video games, muttering under his breath. Alex dragged a suitcase that banged against each stair. Jessica barked orders, sharp and impatient, her eyes red from nights of whispered arguments. David said little, as always, his face gray with the weight of what he'd lost. I did not interfere. I did not gloat. I simply sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the same way I had sat through countless evenings of exclusion. Only this time, it was not me who was invisible. It was them, fading out of a life that had never truly been theirs to claim. At one point, David paused in the doorway. He looked at me, his mouth opening as if to speak. For a heartbeat, I almost saw the boy he once was, the boy who ran to me after school with scraped knees, the boy who clutched my hand so tightly at his father's funeral. But the man standing there had chosen silence too many times. Whatever words he wanted to find, they never came. He lowered his eyes and carried the last box to the car. When the door finally closed behind them, the house exhaled. The air felt lighter. The silence was not heavy but clean, like the pause after a hymn ends. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the banister, the worn wood of the dining table. This was not an empty house. It was mine again. Every nail, every board, every memory. In the living room, I found one of their soda cans left behind on the coffee table, half empty, flat. Without hesitation, I carried it to the trash and dropped it in. The sound of the can hitting the bin was sharper than it should have been, final in a way that made me smile. I opened the windows wide. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the earthy scent of the garden Arthur had planted. For the first time in years, the house smelled like home, not of takeout containers, not of grease and indifference, but of damp soil, of care, of beginnings. That evening I cooked again, not for them, not to prove anything, but for myself. A small piece of beef, stewed slowly with carrots and herbs from the garden. I set one place at the table, lit a single candle, and ate slowly, savoring each bite. As the candle burned low, I thought of Arthur. I thought of the strength it had taken to do this alone, of the quiet victories hidden in ordinary acts. And I realized something. They had not just lost a roof, they had lost me, my patience, my silence, my care. And they would come to understand, too late, what it meant to live without those things. When the last dish was washed and set aside, I returned to the window. The street outside was calm, the dogwood tree a pale silhouette in the moonlight. I breathed in deeply, steady and sure. They had laughed as they tossed my dinner in the trash. They had made me invisible, a shadow in my own home. But I had given them their answer not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with ink, with law, with the quiet dignity they could never take from me. And now the house was mine again, not just in name, in spirit, in truth. I closed the curtains, turned out the light, and whispered to the quiet, to Arthur, to myself, respect is never given. It is claimed. And for the first time in years, I slept without fear of being forgotten.